insurance for laid-off workers, and revitalize neighborhoods devastated by foreclosures. A truly comprehensive approach is needed to get Americans working again, and I hope my colleagues are willing to work with me on passing the Americans Job Act. With that, Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady from California reserves her time. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I first want to start by thanking the gentlelady from California for her work on this legislation and her amendment making the bill better. Mr. Speaker, as many know on this floor that I started before I was in Congress as a small business owner. At the age 20, I took some savings I had, some luck within a lottery and some investments in the market, and I took a risk. I went out and opened a deli. Didn't put a lot of thought into the name, so I named it after myself. But as I took that risk, as many people across this country do, you find the challenges of a small business. Fortunately, I was successful, able to hire people, able to work through. In the end of 2 years, I now had enough money to pay my way through college. Well, when I think back to those days of the risk I took, I wonder if in today's environment could I do the same. And unfortunately, the answer is no, I could not. I cringe at the thought of today of the regulations and the challenges that small business face. And when I look at what small business do to this economy, they represent 99.7% of all employers. And when you analyze the growth of America, and if you just want to take from the beginning of the last recession, 2001, the end of it, to the beginning of this one in 2007, and you look at that time in America when we had job growth, when you think about who created that growth, well, small businesses added 7 million jobs. Large corporations cut 1 million jobs during that same time. And today, when we look at the market, we are at our all-time low in the last 16 years for new small businesses entering. And all statistics tells us we will not grow unless small businesses grow. Unfortunately, the entrance to market has become too great. The regulations have been too tough, and the access to capital has been too hard to get. So just in that story I tell you of starting my own small business when it became successful, before I sold it, I actually looked to expand. I had dreams of putting 5 new delis throughout my town. I even started negotiating on a new lease. But to raise that extra capital, one, a bank had turned me down. But because of the regulations by the federal government, I could only talk to those people I already had a relationship with. Well, I came from a side of town that didn't have great wealth. I didn't know people with money. So for me to be able to talk to them, I'd have to hire an attorney, file with the SEC, all things that I did not have the time to do as a small business, even to talk to somebody about the idea. So I ended up selling. Well, that law was based in 1933. This country has moved forward, and this Congress should move forward as well. That's why today, that's exactly what this bill will do. It will allow the small business to unshackle the capital which it needs. It will allow the individual to talk to those who are accredited, and it has the protections to do that. But the idea could actually gain the capital. And you have to think when you're in a small business, sometimes this capital is better than going to a bank. It's what you negotiate. The cash flow is very important in a small business. A bank makes you pay monthly. The investment of an individual in allows you to have growth. It also allows Americans to invest in America. It is a win-win all the way around. It is involving in a place that allows small business to grow. I will tell you that the strength from the amendment from Maxine Waters and the adoption in the committee requires insurers to verify the purchases are in fact SEC accredited, and I thank you for that amendment. This was approved in the Financial Service Committee by a bipartisan vote. This is another example of an issue where we can find common ground, work on both sides of the aisle, work with this President, but more importantly, let America start working again. Mr. Speaker, I urge all my colleagues to support this common sense legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Without objection, the gentleman from California will control the remaining time on the bill. The gentlelady from California.
Thank you very much. I yield to the gentlelady from New York, 3 minutes.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank my good friend and the ranking member on the subcommittee, Ms. Waters, and for her leadership on this bill, her amendment, and her efforts to make a good product an even better one. And I thank our ranking member, Mr. Frank, for all his leadership on Dodd-Frank and in the committee now, and also Chairman Baucus, Chairman Garrett, and Representative McCarthy. This was a bipartisan effort. So in a Congress that everyone says we're not working together, this is one example where we work together in the best sense of the word to bring this bill to the floor. I rise in strong support of the Access to Capital for Job Creators Act because I believe that it will help businesses in our country raise money they need to create jobs and help our economy recover. This is an important bill for businesses across our country, but it is particularly important to New York City. New York City is the home of many innovators, innovations, entrepreneurs come there from across the country, and this bill will help them raise money and grow the American dream and help them go up that ladder of success in providing jobs and helping our economy. Under our current system, companies seeking to raise capital by selling shares are barred from many types of advertising and solicitations. In effect, our current system tells businesses, go out and create jobs, but don't tell people who might want to invest in your company or invest in your idea or invest in America, don't tell them anything. So this message is contradictory at best and patently unfair at worst, and is bad for businesses at a time when we are asking businesses across this country to lead our economic recovery and to create jobs. This bill before us today would end this contradiction by removing the restrictions on general solicitation and advertising for certain private securities offerings. It will help companies attract potential investors and raise the capital that they need to be successful. And this bill accomplishes this task in a balanced way. During the committee markup and work on this bill, we incorporated numerous ideas from both sides of the aisle, including a provision requiring that issuers verify that an investor is actually eligible to purchase the offered securities. The Waters Amendment made sure that the investors were credible and accredited. Today, as it stands, investors only self-certify that they have $1 million in assets or make $200,000 a year to qualify to purchase the private security. Now with this bill, we will have additional safeguards in place to make sure that investors are qualified and that these financial transactions are safer. I support this bill today. I urge my colleagues to join in supporting it, and I feel that this is really an investment in the American dream. I hope that we can likewise work together to pass the American Jobs Act in a bipartisan way. We are not going to cut our way to prosperity. We need to invest and grow our economy. This bill helps us to do that. The American Jobs Act does too, and I hope our colleagues will join us in supporting that important job creator initiative also. So this is a vote for the American dream. I'm proud to support it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to a doctor, mother, businesswoman who brings a fresh perspective to the freshman class and knows firsthand the challenges that job creators face, having started her own medical practice from scratch. The gentlelady from New York's 19th District, Congresswoman Nan Hayden.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Whip. Last week, I had the privilege of coming to the floor and sharing a letter from one of our constituents in the 19th Congressional District of New York, Mr. Paul Manahan from Mahopac, New York. And this is what he wrote. We don't need or want more government spending. Cut regulations, cut taxes, repeal the 2010 health care law, and let business do what it does best, create jobs based upon demand, not government dictates, spending, and attempts at market manipulation. And today, in this bill, the Access to Capital for Job Creators Act, H.R. 2940, we are taking yet another step toward implementing this kind of advice from a common-sense American. Small businesses, as many of us have already mentioned, but they really are the job creators and the key to a healthy and strong economy. Our #1 priority in this Congress is to ensure that the regulatory environment for small businesses supports capital formation, investment, and job creation. This bill does exactly that, furthering job creation by eliminating unnecessary regulations. The Access to Capital for Job Creators Act creates jobs by eliminating a prohibition on solicitation that is a barrier to capital formation and job creation. And regulations that are unnecessary in this case are being eliminated because investors under Regulation D have to be sophisticated and accredited. So there's the common sense. This is a win all the way around. I'm very proud to co-sponsor this important piece of legislation, and I am so glad to join colleagues on both sides of the aisle supporting this bill. I want to make mention of the fact that this bill now joins 15 other bills that have been supported by both Democrats and Republicans. They are listed on a card that we're carrying with us and that you've probably seen quite a bit. I want the Senate to know that this support from both sides indicates how strongly we are committed to creating jobs, and our nation cannot wait for the Senate to hold yet this one hostage as well. So I urge its swift passage, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentlelady from California.
I continue to yield to myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentlelady's recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members. I'm very pleased that we have bipartisan support for this legislation. It has been stated over and over again that access to capital is extremely important to our businesses and small businesses in particular. Mr. Chairman and members, we talk a lot about our support for small businesses, but I know there's a long way to go in order to make sure that they have not only access to capital, but we have one-stop shops and other kinds of efforts that will help them not only to grow their businesses and expand their businesses, but to hire people. And really, that's what this is all about. This is about how do we stimulate our economy, how do we get it working, how do we create jobs. This is one way that we can do this. And while we're talking about small businesses, let me remind you that in the American Jobs Act that is being debated by this Congress, we have similar efforts for small businesses. We have tax credits for small businesses. We have tax credits when they hire workers, when they hire veterans. And so I'm very pleased that both sides of the aisle, we're showing more and more support. These small businesses need this capital to acquire inventory. Many of them need to get up to speed with their computer equipment to be able to market their services, their goods, and their products. And so, as we do this, let us keep in mind this is one aspect of how we stimulate the economy, how we grow our small businesses, how we give support to them. But let's look at the other ways that we're talking about doing. Don't forget, many small businesses will benefit from the repair of our infrastructure. Just think about it. When we are repairing our roads and our bridges and our water systems, small business persons will have many opportunities to grow their businesses, whether or not they are wholesalers and people in the middle who will be providing supplies and materials to those contractors, or whether or not they're subcontracting for some aspect of this development and growth and repair of our infrastructure. So we're on the right track here when we talk about assistance to small businesses and job creation, but let us open up our minds and really think about how the infrastructure repair will certainly be a big boom for small businesses. I can point to other things in the American Jobs Act. Just think about the construction and repair of our schools. We have schools that still need a lot of repair. They don't have science labs. The laboratories and much of what is involved in the whole construction of schools is very much needed. And so, again, our small businesses will benefit from this. Just think about it. When they go to their local boards of education and they get involved in supplying goods and services as we repair these schools and build more schools, that's how you stimulate the economy. You cannot separate small businesses from jobs. Small businesses create jobs. Jobs allow people the ability to spend money and to stimulate our economy. So I'm just so pleased that we see bipartisan support in the effort for small businesses. Let's not stop here. Let's keep going. Let's keep creating these opportunities so that we can say that we're a country that not only respects small businesses, but we're going to put our money where our mouths are, and we're going to give them the opportunity, again, to create and grow and expand. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I have no further requests for time, and I will yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back her time. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to an integral member of the Financial Service Committee who ran one of the oldest pest management companies in the country and has personally faced many of the challenges confronting small business today. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly want to thank the gentleman from California for yielding the time. And one thing that I'm very pleased about today is that we're talking about some bipartisan legislation that it does focus in on the #1 issue that we face in our country today, and that's jobs in the economy. As a small business owner, I can personally understand that access to capital is critical in sometimes determining the factor between success and failure for small businesses. Small businesses do represent 2/3 of all net new jobs created in our nation. Businesses, especially small businesses, must raise capital to create and maintain jobs, to invest in research and development, to sell and market goods and services, and generally to expand their businesses. Debt financing is very difficult and sometimes impossible in today's market, especially for smaller businesses like my own. Equity financing is also very difficult with enormous transaction costs and very expensive and time-consuming SEC regulation requirements. Our capital markets, both debt and equity, are struggling and expensive for small businesses, and so we need to find creative ways to reduce the regulatory costs and burdens. This legislation, this common-sense legislation, I would add, would do just that. It would give companies greater access to capital to grow and to create jobs, while still protecting the less sophisticated investors at no cost to the American taxpayers. Specifically, this bill removes the ban on small companies from soliciting equity financing from accredited investors. It expands the pool of those that we can go out to help raise dollars, to help raise resources, so that we can invest in our businesses, so that we can grow them. There are 29 million small businesses in our nation. If we can create an environment here in Washington where half of those businesses can create a single job, think about where we'd be then. This is the kind of bipartisan legislation. When we talk about jobs in the economy, we are doing things in the United States Congress. I certainly want to thank the gentlelady from California for her leadership. I want to thank the Chairman Baucus for his leadership. Certainly want to thank Chairman Garrett, because this is the kind of legislation, bipartisan legislation, that can get our economy moving again and focus back on jobs. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to a man who knows what it takes to create jobs and meet a payroll. Having spent 20 years building a real estate development company that started with his brothers and sisters, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Canseco.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the Access to Capital for Jobs Creators Act, and I want to thank the gentleman from California, Mr. McCarthy, and the gentlelady from California, Ms. Waters, for this bipartisan effort, as well as our leadership on the committee. As a nation, we have an unemployment rate that is hovering around 9% and 14 million Americans out of work. We've had 32 consecutive months with unemployment rates at or above 8%. Yet Senator Harry Reid, the majority leader, insists it's very clear that private sector jobs have been doing fine. The American people disagree. I'm 62 years old and a freshman in the People's House. Before coming to Congress, I spent my entire career in the private sector. I've signed the front of a paycheck. I know something about how to create jobs. What I know is that attempting to spend our way to an economic recovery won't work, and we have the economy today that proves just that. From the experiences gained from an almost 40-year career in private business, to get the private sector creating jobs again and our economy growing, government needs to get out of the way and not be an impediment to job creation. This is the philosophy that has governed bill after bill that the House has passed to get our economy moving again. And unfortunately, these bills are rotting at the doorstep of the Senate as Harry Reid refuses to allow them to be considered.
The time of the gentleman has expired.
Thank you.
The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure now to yield 2 minutes to the chairman of the Capital Markets and Government-Sponsored Enterprises Subcommittee. He's been a leading advocate for pro-growth economic policies. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Garrett.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 2 minutes.
And I thank the gentleman. I thank the gentleman from California as well for his leadership on this issue, as well as others, and also behind us over here, the chairman of the full committee, Spencer Baucus, for his leadership on this issue, and as well on the general issue of trying to do what we can do best in order to facilitate the greater liquidity and openness and credit in the marketplace. And this bill is one step in that direction. So I commend both gentlemen for their efforts in that regard. You know, I was on the floor, I guess, for the last few days now, and I've heard members from the other side of the aisle repeatedly coming to the floor saying, well, where are the jobs bills? We haven't had any jobs bills come through. Well, here is certainly one of the pinnacles of the jobs bills that we've been talking about that this House has passed already, and today we will pass going forward. What this bill will do is provide, as it already indicated, to both small and big businesses the opportunity to get the wherewithal to start their business, grow their business, expand their businesses, and to do what after that? Create jobs. And that's what this is all about. We just had a litany of people come to the floor, one right after the other, just as the sponsor of the bill is. Someone who started out with probably not much in his pockets, but was able to get that all together and probably get some capital outside of that as well, and do what? Create a business, and then it wasn't a one-man operation, I'm sure. He then brought people into that business. He created jobs. The other speakers who came to this floor as well, they created jobs. This bill, as the other side of the aisle has already indicated, recognizes this bill will create jobs. Now, one of the other things this bill does is to create certainty in the marketplace, something that has been a problem over the last couple of years with all of the legislation and regulation has been coming out of Washington. This will provide some degree of certainty in the marketplace so that investors and business owners will understand how they can get into the credit marketplace and do so. Now, I know a little bit later from now, we may see some attempts to amend this bill. It would go in just the opposite direction. What would it do? It would provide more uncertainty into the marketplace. It would provide more convolution to the system and make it even more difficult to do what we're trying to do today. So I would say support this bill, clean as it is right now, to create more jobs for the American public.
Time of the gentleman's expired. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the former chairman of the Small Business Committee who has never stopped working to create good-paying jobs for Northern Illinois.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I hear complaints from our small business constituents back home about the difficulty in raising capital. Today we have an opportunity to fix one aspect of this problem so that our nation's small businesses can obtain the funds that they need to hire workers. Current law bars companies from raising capital through unsolicited advertisements. Requiring potential investors to have an existing relationship with a particular company limits the pool of potential investors and hampers the efforts of small companies who have a great idea to raise much-needed capital to expand and hire workers. This bill would make an exemption in the advertising ban for accredited investors. H.R. 2940 will make it easier for companies to raise capital without putting less sophisticated investors at risk. As a former chairman of the Small Business Committee, I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 2940. The bill will help small gazelle firms raise capital during these difficult economic times.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, this time I yield 1 minute to a member who is leading the way in encouraging job creation in Ohio's 15th District, Mr. Stivers.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the gentleman from California for yielding me time and his leadership on this issue. I want to voice my support for the Access to Capital and Job Creators Act. This is straightforward legislation that provides a simple method for job creators to find funding for their businesses. This legislation will allow entrepreneurs to advertise their investment opportunity to accredited investors to solicit their investment without being subject to costly and burdensome regulation. This exemption would only apply to general solicitations or advertising if the buyers are accredited investors, those people that have a $1 million net worth or have a $200,000 income. This leaves protections in place for those who may be less sophisticated investors. Simply put, this bill helps finance job growth in America by connecting small businesses and job creators with sophisticated investors while keeping protection for less sophisticated investors. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to a new member who knows firsthand how to create jobs through his work. He's employed over 100 people. The gentleman from Butler, Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of this piece of legislation. This is so common sense. This is so basic. It is as basic as blood is to the body. The access to capital for small businesses, the ability to raise capital in hard times. I will tell you right now, the biggest inhibitor right now to us creating jobs is the uncertainty. And for anybody in small business to go to a bank right now and say, I need to borrow money, I want to buy equipment, I want to invest in inventory, you know what they're met with? We're not sure we can do that. With the new rules and regulations, we don't know them yet, so we have to kind of hold back on that. But you know what? We need access to that capital. If we are to succeed, if we are to move forward as a country, we need to unleash those bonds that are keeping us moribund, and we can do it. This legislation is common sense, and as I said earlier, this is the same as blood to the body. Access of capital to a small business, absolutely critical, has to be done now, and great bipartisan support on it. I thank you, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure now to yield 1 minute to the members whose top priority in Washington is getting the Granite Staters back to work. The gentleman from Manchester, New Hampshire, Mr. Ginther.
Gentleman from New Hampshire is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you for yielding the time, Mr. Speaker. You know all too well that Granite Staters are still hurting in this economy as many Americans. And the one thing that we can do as a body in a bipartisan way is to continue to bring jobs bills to this floor and vote them out in a bipartisan way as the country has asked. And we're doing that today. The leadership that Mr. McCarthy and Ms. Waters has both demonstrated is an opportunity for this country to get greater access to capital, to get innovators and job creators the ability to hire quicker. For those like our own Dean Kamen to continue to find the next revolutionary way to change our state and our nation. This is a great opportunity for us to reform an old piece of legislation going back to 1933, update it to make sure it's required standards of 2011 for the new job creators of tomorrow. And I'm thrilled to support it. And I look forward to more job creation bills that come to this floor for us to vote on and get our country moving back in the right direction. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, this bill represents an important step towards unleashing the potentials of entrepreneurs and small businesses. And we must all remember, an entrepreneur never takes a job from someone. They only create them. And today we're going to unleash them. I urge all my colleagues to join me in this bipartisan effort to help promote small businesses, capital formation by supporting the underlying bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. All time for debate on the bill has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment printed in Part B of House Report number 112-265, offered by Mr. Miller of North Carolina.
Pursuant to House Resolution 453, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Miller, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This
amendment will require a disclosure that if there are going to be unregulated solicitations, unregulated advertisements asking for investments in these companies, that at the very least that the advertisement or the solicitation should reveal should disclose if there is a compensation agreement with the executives or golden parachute severance packages and what those are. So that investors won't find that they are buying into a company that if it does make a profit, there are already contracts in place that will make sure that all those profits go to the executives who are there and not to the investors. We've heard all manner of glowing praise for the kinds of small businesses that might benefit from this bill. I think the gentleman from Illinois referred to these as gazelle companies. Mr. Speaker, there has been a bad history of flim-flams that have taken investors' money. The reason that we have investor protections is not just because of the self-aggrandizing ambitions of regulators. It is because there's been a history of abuse. And that abuse discourages capital from coming. No one is going to want to invest when there have been well-publicized examples of investors who put their money into unregulated companies like these, like what this bill would create, and lost their entire investment because it all was grabbed by a handful of executives. And these disclosures are even more important because these companies will not be subject to the say-on-pay rules under the financial reform legislation passed and signed into law just last year. And we've already seen from the experience on say-on-pay that there remain real abuses of executive compensation. Even though many companies have changed their practices and made them more transparent because they are worried about putting their pay practices to a vote of the shareholders, they fear disapproval and they've changed their practices. But even with that, about 2%, which is actually a pretty big number, get turned down. And they all get turned down for pretty much the same reasons. There's no connection between pay and performance. There are poor pay practices like long-term benefits without any kind of performance measure. There are bonuses that were way too easy to achieve. The bar was set very, very low. There are performance measures that make no sense, or simply that there was poor disclosure of what the compensation was, or the compensation was simply too much for the size of the company and what others in the industry are paying. These companies will not have say-on-pay. They will not get a chance to vote on executive compensation, and they might find that they have bought into a company that has pay practices already in place, executive compensation contracts, golden parachute contracts, that really assures that even if the company does prove to be profitable, they won't get the benefit of the profits. It will all go to the executives who are selling them investments, who are encouraging them to invest in those companies. These are obviously very, very helpful disclosures. This is important information for investors, and honest small businesses should not hesitate in the least to provide it. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from California.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I rise to claim the time in opposition.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Miller's amendment goes against the very purpose of this bill. This amendment would force private companies raising capital to actually face stiffer regulations than public companies regarding compensation. The Securities Exchange Commission doesn't require public companies selling to retail investors to put this in their advertising. And even Dodd-Frank did not go this far. With Ms. Waters' help, we made sure this bill specifically targets only sophisticated Security Exchange accredited investors. The SEC has no authority to regulate the compensation of executives at private companies. At a time where the costs and benefits of regulations are so important, Mr. Miller's amendment would fail anyone's cost-benefit analysis. I therefore urge my colleagues to reject this amendment, and I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from New York, Nan Hayward.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Whip. I'd like to add to my colleagues' comments by noting that shareholders in major public corporations, major issuers of public stock, have said over and over again that they do not find that the amount of capital that would have to be devoted, the amount of resources that would have to be devoted to unusual disclosures about executive compensation beyond what the SEC rules already require prior to Dodd-Frank actually make any difference to their decisions about investing at all. So you can certainly expect that accredited investors who are sophisticated will not need this kind of additional burden to be placed on companies that clearly they want to see thrive and grow with the precious capital that they have. And I yield back my time, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the purpose of H.R. 2940 is to help facilitate capital for small business. This amendment flies directly in the face of that effort. I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Pursuant to the rule, the previous question is ordered on the bill as amended and the amendment offered by the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Miller. The gentleman from California seek recognition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the Speaker may postpone further proceeding on the amendment offered by Mr. Miller of North Carolina to H.R. 2940 as through under Clause 8A, 1A of Rule 20.
Is there objection? Seeing none, so ordered. Questions on the amendment by the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Miller. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Speaker, on that I request a recorded vote.
Does the gentleman ask for the yeas and nays?
I do.
Yeas and nays are requested. Those in favor of vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20 in the previous order of the House, further proceedings on this question will be postponed.
Yes. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks on H.R. 2930 and to insert extraneous materials thereon.
Without objection, and pursuant to House Rule 453 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and Committee of the Whole or the State of the Union for the consideration of H.R. 2930. The Chair appoints the gentleman from New Hampshire, Mr. Bass, to preside over the Committee of the Whole.
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of H.R. 2930, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to amend the securities laws to provide for registration exemptions for certain crowd-funded securities and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the bill is considered read the first time. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, and the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter, each will control 30 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume. When I'm at home in western North Carolina, I hear frequently from my constituents, from small businesses, that they have a very difficult time raising capital in these very challenging times that we're in. And over 2 years into an economic recovery that is struggling, America's labor and capital markets continue to face unprecedented challenges. Nearly 14 million Americans remain officially unemployed, with an additional 11 million underemployed. And small businesses continue to struggle to access capital, despite an endless number of government initiatives. The origin of these barriers to capital formation rests in 2 major federal securities laws, the Securities Act of 1933 and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, that have not been substantially updated since a gallon of gasoline cost 10 cents and only 31% of households owned a telephone. Today, a gallon of gas, as we know, costs about 35 times more per gallon than it did then. And nearly every American owns a telephone. In fact, most people have the Internet in their pockets. So while the comparison of then and now is nostalgic, the ramifications of not modernizing our securities regulations have led to registration and reporting requirements so onerous and costly that small companies have great difficulty raising capital. For instance, if a startup company offers an equity stake to investors through a medium like Facebook or Twitter, it is presumably in violation of SEC regulations for that communication and offering. However, soliciting money for one's favorite charity or even a political candidate through the same Internet medium is perfectly legal. So clearly something is not right. Furthermore, high net worth individuals can invest in businesses before the average family can. And that small business is limited on the amount of equity stake they can provide investors and limited in the number of investors they can get. So clearly something has to be done to open these capital markets to the average investor. And that's what the Entrepreneur Access to Capital Act is all about. It removes the SEC restrictions on crowdfunding to allow entrepreneurs and small businesses to raise capital from everyday investors. Already prevalent in Europe and Asia, crowdfunding has proven that broadening the communication and investment capabilities between investors and entrepreneurs can have a positive impact and a positive effect on capital formation, which is the lifeblood of a strong and growing economy. Specifically, my bill will allow companies to pool up to $1 million without the expense of registering with the SEC, or up to $2 million if the company provides investors with audited financial statements. Individual contributors are limited to $10,000 or 10% of the investor's annual income, whichever is less. In addition, H.R. 2930 creates a regulatory structure of investor protection around this new innovative form of financing, with substantial intermediary requirements or issuer requirements if there is no intermediary. This key mandate for investor protection is why the bill has received broad bipartisan support, both in the Financial Service Committee and from President Obama. This has been crafted both with Republican and Democrat staffers, getting input from my colleagues from across the aisle in a subcommittee markup, multiple hearings that we've had on the idea of crowdfunding, as well as a full committee markup. And we worked together and passed it with a bipartisan vote coming out of committee. This was a collaborative operation, and I appreciate my colleagues. And I appreciate the staff of the Financial Service Committee, as well as the staff on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, where in my subcommittee we had a number of hearings on capital formation, and out of that came this idea. This is the culmination of months of work. The process began for crafting this piece of legislation over the summer. And when the President stood in this hall, in this room, just a couple months ago for his jobs bill, and when he includes that in the proposal, this idea of crowdfunding, it was a very positive thing. Not just to have a good idea that we can pass here in the House, but to have a good idea that has a possibility of getting through the Senate, where it's a very challenging time for them to pass legislation at all. And that way can make it to the President's desk and really give entrepreneurs the opportunity to raise this capital, to actually help create and grow jobs. And that's why they need the capital, so we can grow jobs, create jobs, and provide more opportunity for our constituents and folks across this country. We can protect and inspire confidence in the investor community, as well as allow small businesses, those companies most critical to our economy, to gain the capital needed to expand, compete, and thrive. I urge my colleagues to support this bill that combines both the best of microfinance with the power of crowdsourcing, and give folks the opportunity, the everyday investor, the opportunity to have an equity stake in their favorite company. Not just accredited investors, not just so-called high net worth individuals. And that's the purpose of this legislation. I ask my colleagues to support this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank my friend from North Carolina for bringing this matter to the floor, for being the sponsor of this bill, and for working with us to make this bill better. Now, as Mr. McHenry said, this is a bill that really allows money to be raised, investments to be made by people without a lot of money. They are investors who are going to make smaller investments but in a large volume. And as my friend said, this isn't 1933 and this isn't 1934 when those acts were passed, but still what we've got to remember is sales can be made on the Internet now, or this bill will ask that sales be made of securities on the Internet. Originally, it could be on the phone, could have been by mail, could have been by word of mouth. But what we've got to do is, with this ability to raise money across the Internet, that the proper protections are put into place so that those who might deceive or defraud or in some other way mislead investors who are making these investments can be policed and the laws can be enforced if in fact there is some type of fraudulent act. Now, H.R. 2930 enables small companies and individuals to make use of Internet-based social networks to raise up to $1 million from friends, family, and other interested investors. While the bill caps both the total level of securities and the amount investors can invest, Democrats expressed strong concerns about the potential harm this new market could pose to investors. Originally, the bill provided few investor protections and no SEC or state regulatory oversight. During the committee markup of 2930, Democrats added provisions requiring crowdfunding, and crowdfunding is a term that really isn't seen in our law to date. And what it is the sale of securities, the solicitation of investments across the Internet in small amounts. So Democrats asked that there be notice given to state regulators so that they could police the activities against wrongful conduct, deception, fraud, embezzlement, or other kinds of misdeeds. Democrats successfully added a provision to disqualify bad actors, individuals that have been convicted of either state or federal securities law violations or other financial law violations. Democrats also requested, and the gentleman from North Carolina and the Republicans agreed, to create a regulatory framework for the crowdfunding websites that would provide additional disclosures, safeguards, and protections for investors who wanted to buy into one of these investments. We recently had a financial crisis that we're still continuing to dig our way out of. There were Ponzi schemes. You know, everybody's aware of the Madoff Ponzi scheme and others. We need to have protection for investors as businesses seek to form and develop capital. We thank the gentleman from North Carolina in working with us to place some of those investor protections into this bill. We know there will be a number of amendments that are proposed that will continue to strengthen those investor protections. We thank the gentleman from North Carolina for bringing this bill forward. And with that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from North Carolina.
I thank the chairman, and I thank my colleague from Colorado for working actively with me and with my staff to make this bill better, and as well as my colleagues, Ms. McCarthy, Ms. Maloney from New York, my apologies, Ms. Waters of California, Mr. Green. Thank you so much for your work and working in a bipartisan way to improve the bill. With that, I'd like to yield such time as he may consume to the chairman of the Financial Services Committee, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Backus.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I feel like that I'm having a dream, and in that dream, my colleague Patrick McHenry has legislation on the floor, and President Obama has endorsed that legislation. I feel like I ought to wake up and find out that that was a dream, but in reality, it's actually what's happening here today. I told Mr. McHenry that I would like unanimous consent to ask that we call this the McHenry-Obama Friendship Bill, but I won't do that. Let me say this. The President did issue a statement yesterday, and in that statement it says the administration supports House passage of H.R. 2930. It goes on to say, in the President's September 8th address to the joint session of Congress on jobs and the economy, he called for cutting away red tape that prevents many rapidly growing startup companies from raising needed capital, including through crowdfunding exemption from the requirement to register public securities offerings with the Securities Exchange Commission. And he goes on to say that he believes that this bill will make it much easier for entrepreneurs to raise capital and create jobs. And it will. Last night I was at a Faith and Politics dinner where our friend Congressman Steny Hoyer and Congressman Roy Blunt, or Senator Roy Blunt, were receiving an award. They were receiving the John Lewis Amo Houghton Award. And as we know, both those colleagues, they are bridge builders. The gentlemen at the table next to me, and these were people that were supporting Faith and Politics, said to me, I appreciate the fact you're going to bring a crowdfunding bill to the floor of the House. And I was somewhat amazed because a few months ago, I have to admit, I'm not a high-techie like the President or Congressman McHenry, but I really didn't know the difference in clown funding and crowdfunding before we started talking about this bill. And I said to him, how do you know about this bill? And he said, well, I'm an executive with Facebook. And he said, many companies similar to Facebook, and you mentioned this in your earlier speech, in other countries. And he said, even they do it here, but they avoid the law. They raise money through crowdfunding. And it is a modern thing to do. It's like a Facebook, it's like Google, it's like BlackBerry several years ago. It's something that we didn't know about, but we do now, and we do need to keep our laws current. I do also close by commending Congressman Perlmutter for making this bill a better bill and one that protects consumers. But with this legislation, we'll move this provision into the 21st century and bring it up to date with modern ways to finance businesses. And that'll give us an advantage that we presently is a disadvantage when it comes to competing with some of our foreign competition. We certainly want to level that playing field and create jobs, and this bill does that. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to, for the record, H.R. 2930 creates a new exemption from Registration 33 for, we call it crowdfunding securities. I think the record should have a definition. Crowdfunding refers to a technique for raising money over the Internet in relatively small amounts from a large number of people. And that's the exemption that's being sought pursuant to this bill. Different way to raise money. We still need to have, would the gentleman agree? I yield to my friend from North Carolina.
I thank my colleague for submitting that for the record, the definition. Now, the intention is that you have an Internet portal of sorts, but this could be done on any mass basis, but the disclosures have to be very clear, which we specified in the legislation, and we've given the SEC the ability to specify additional pieces. I have a technical amendment to clarify what the Securities and Exchange Committee staff thinks is very important to add to this bill. But I do appreciate the gentleman offering the definition. I yield back.
I thank my friend. One other new term in the bill that we ought to have some discussion about is intermediary. Intermediary in the bill is more or less a custodian of funds until there is. Am I correct or not? I'd yield back to my friend.
No, I appreciate the gentleman. The intention would be that the intermediary is, in essence, the conduit of funds. There's the notion of the broker-dealer, which is well established in law. What this does is create a very, it's similar to a broker-dealer, but it is very low regulatory, low-cost basis of doing it. What this is it is, in essence, an intermediary defined as Webster's would define an intermediary. And I think that's probably the better way to describe it.
Okay. To the degree that the intermediary exists in this, they will be subject to the enforcement principles as we go through the amendments. And with that, I'm going to yield 3 minutes to my other friend from North Carolina, Mr. Miller.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair. Exempting this funding source from SEC regulation is not all this bill does. It also prohibits the state from doing anything. This is not a case where the proponents of the bill are saying, let's not let the federal government do this, let's let the states do this. They say, no, the states can't touch it at all. The people of the various states, using their right to vote, can't decide that in their state they want someone looking at what is being offered to mom-and-pop investors to make sure that they're not getting flim-flammed. That is a great deal of the protection, the investor protections that we've had in this country has been done at the state level, and this takes those cops off the beat altogether. So if you think that the states should be able to exercise their own judgment, the people of the states should be able to exercise their own judgment about whether they want their states looking at what is being offered to mom-and-pop investors, you should vote against this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
Yield back the balance of his time. Gentleman from North Carolina.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I need to correct the record from what my colleague from North Carolina said. What he said is simply not, in fact, what this bill does. Furthermore, as we know, securities fraud is prosecuted not just at the federal level but by the states as well. That will continue to exist. Furthermore, if my colleague from North Carolina would reach out to my colleague from Colorado, I'm supporting his amendment which preserves the state's rights of action. I'd be happy to yield.
Yes, that has to do with enforcement. But the bill prohibits the states from having upfront disclosure requirements so that a Secretary of State, who is typically the securities law enforcer in most states, can look at it, require disclosure, look at what the disclosures are, look at whether what is being offered is really what is there. It does, yes, the bill does. Thanks to the gentleman from Colorado's good work.
I appreciate it. Reclaiming my time. To correct the record, in the state of North Carolina, there is no pre-filing requirement. In the state of New York, for instance, they actually have upfront filing requirements. Additionally, in this legislation, how it is crafted is the SEC would provide notice of this offering to the states once that offering occurs. This is something that my colleague from New York, Ms. Maloney, crafted in the subcommittee. We worked, my staff, as well as the Financial Service Committee Republican staff, worked diligently with the Democrat staff on the Financial Services Committee, as well as Ms. Maloney's staff, and came up with a 3-page amendment which was adopted on a bipartisan basis at the committee. I appreciate my colleague from New York offering that, and it has improved the bill.
If the gentleman
I'd be happy to yield.
Did the gentleman not get a letter dated November 3rd, 2011?
Reclaiming my time. Go right ahead.
From Elaine Marshall saying what you just said ain't right.
Reclaiming my time. I did not receive that letter. My 2 Democrat colleagues from North Carolina that are on the Financial Service Committee did in fact get that letter. My colleague Mel Watt a fantastic member, submitted it for the record in the Financial Service Committee. I've had neither a letter nor a call from my Secretary of State raising concerns about that. And with that, I'd be happy to yield such time as he may consume to my colleague from New Jersey, the chairman of the Subcommittee on Capital Markets and Financial Services, Mr. Garrett.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
And I thank the gentleman from North Carolina for all of his work on this legislation, as well as the chairman of the full committee, Spencer Bachus, for his leadership on this initiative as well, to the extent as with the previous piece of legislation that we had, it goes to the overarching theme, I think, of today and all during the last 10 months of this time in the House, which is job creation for this country. What can we do here in the House of Representatives to facilitate the creation of more jobs? And just like with the last piece of legislation, what we can do is help businesses, both small and large, to obtain additional capital, capital being at the heart of the ability of a small business to go out, to expand, to grow, to hire new employees, and to create jobs in this country. Now, legislation before us goes well in that direction, and now, done in a bipartisan manner, it, as the sponsor, stands head and shoulders above the way it was before, because it adds additional provisions for safety and soundness to it. It allows for equity financing, in which investors can purchase ownership stakes in a company in exchange for what? For basically stock or shares in those companies, to grow in a future direction, to grow larger and what have you, and allows the companies to obtain those funds without having to not repay specific amounts at any particular time. What does that mean? That means it enables the company today to obtain that capital today, to expand the company and hire new employees. Now, through the efforts of the gentleman from North Carolina, what they did in a bipartisan manner was to add additional what do you want to call it, protections, I guess it will, and which was part of the discussion I think we had in committee at the time, and that was a good discussion there. We had a hearing on it in the committee, and we had the markup in committee, rather, to allow for some of these discussions, and I know went further after the hearing and eventually with markup to achieve this. And I think it's important. I'm just going to spend a minute. I know you touched upon some of these. I want to take a minute or two to run through what the additional protections that we are providing for investors. In no particular order. Well, maybe they are, actually. They're on order of page 8 and 9 of the bill, but in front of me here. First, warning investors of the speculative nature generally applicable to investment in startups, and that's what we're talking about here. They're startups, and if you're going to invest in a startup, it's not a sure thing. It is speculative, so those warnings are there. Secondly, warning investors that they are subject to the restrictions on sale requirements. What does that basically mean is that if you're investing in this today, don't expect necessarily that you can just take your money out tomorrow, but there may be restrictions as to when you can take out your money, but that's necessary, as I said before, so that the business can have that capital to grow. So it's reasonable. Thirdly, taking reasonable measures to reduce the risk of fraud with respect to such transactions. Again, reasonable measure. Fourthly, providing the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, with continuous investor-level access to the issuer's website. Why? Because we want to make sure that that information that is being conveyed to whom, the investors in this, is the same information that the SEC has, a good provision. Fifthly, requiring each potential investor to answer questions. To do what? To demonstrate their abilities, and I think the gentleman from North Carolina already went through this as far as what those restrictions should be. But A, recognition of the level of risk generally applicable. Goes back to what I said before. If you're going to get involved in this, make sure that you understand it, and that's one of the questions. B, risk of liquidity. If you're talking about a startup company as opposed to something that's traded on one of the exchanges, there's not a lot of liquidity out there, generally speaking. That means there's not a lot of folks out there who are trading these shares on a daily or hourly basis. So you have to understand that there is going to be a restriction on liquidity in this marketplace. And see such other areas as the SEC may determine appropriate. So broad authority there. 6 out of 7th I'm going to touch upon, and maybe this is the point that the gentleman was just referencing in some respects, the outsourcing of cash managing functions to a qualified third-party custodian. And I think the gentleman referenced traditional brokers, dealers, but actually this goes into a slightly different caveat from that, which I think is actually the appropriate manner. Otherwise, what you may be doing, with all these restrictions being good, you don't want to get too restrictive in this and too costly. If you did do that, then you may end up making this just as difficult as if you were in some other framework. I'll yield to the gentleman.
I thank my colleague.